blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jackie, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, December 7th issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Second strike, not key issue in boat shots. Invoking Rules of War for Criminal Question by Charlie Savage and Julian E. Barnes. Washington. As Congress parses the details of a follow-on strike that killed initial survivors of President Trump's first boat attack on September 2nd, a much larger issue risks getting lost. Whether Mr. Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth have caused the military to commit crimes in a score of attacks. Admiral Frank M. Bradley, who commanded the September 2nd operation, on Thursday showed lawmakers a video of the attack. The briefing was part of a congressional effort to understand his decision to order a second strike and determine whether the survivors of the first one remained in the fight or were technically shipwrecked, making it a war crime to kill them. There have been shifting narratives emerging from the Pentagon, and the video showing the minutes before the second strike has been interpreted several ways. But each interpretation entails analyzing the actions of suspected drug runners to actual combat activities. The comparisons are strained at best. Legal experts say because the laws of war were not written for and do not fit a drug smuggling situation. Debate over when a shipwrecked crew member loses protection from attack missiles is the point, said Jeffrey S. Korn, who was formerly the Army's senior advisor for law of war issues. The real problem here is the dubious and legally overbroad assertion that the United States is justified in using wartime authority against a criminal problem. As a matter of plain reality, an unarmed speedboat, even if it is carrying cocaine, is not a warship. And none of the 11 people aboard, not merely the 2 initial survivors, but also the 9 people the U.S. military killed in its first strike, were fighting anyone. The September 2nd boat attack was the first in Mr. Trump's policy of directing the military to summarily kill people who are suspected of smuggling drugs at sea, as if they are enemy soldiers on a battlefield. The military has gone on to attack 21 more such boats, killing 87 people in all, according to the administration. The conversation about whether that campaign amounts to murder has largely taken place among experts in laws governing the use of armed force. The United States has long handled the problem of maritime drug smuggling by using the Coast Guard to intercept boats and to arrest people. That echoes how it works on land. Police officers who believe people are dealing drugs arrest them, and if they're convicted, they serve time in prison. They are not executed. It would be a crime if officers instead simply gunned down suspected drug dealers in the street. Summarily, a military force is not allowed to target civilians, and being a suspected criminal does not make someone lose civilian status. In peacetime, targeting a civilian is murder. In an armed conflict, targeting a civilian is a war crime. To justify the killings, Mr. Trump has declared that the United States is in a formal armed conflict against drug cartels and that smuggling boat crews are combatants, all because he is determined so. While Congress has not authorized an armed conflict, a memo by the President's appointees at the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel accepts his claim that there is one. Based on that premise, it says the drugs suspected of being aboard the boats are lawful military targets because cartels could use the profits to finance their purported war efforts, according to people who have seen the memo. It is difficult to find people knowledgeable about the relevant body of law and not working for Mr. Trump who think the United States is really in an armed conflict. The essential problem is that trafficking illegal drugs, while a serious crime, is different from an armed attack. And to the extent the administration has tried to offer substantive justifications for Mr. Trump's purported determination, they appear to collapse under scrutiny. The White House has highlighted the deaths of tens of thousands of American drug users a year from overdoses. But even if those deaths somehow amounted to an armed attack, the surge in overdoses over the past decade was mostly caused by fentanyl, and that comes from labs in Mexico which use Chinese chemicals. The dramatic increase has not been fueled by cocaine that comes on boats from South America. The Trump administration has also suggested that it can use armed force against suspected drug runners as a matter of the collective self-defense of other countries whose security forces sometimes clash with well-armed cartel goons, such as Colombia and Mexico. But the presidents of both of those countries have condemned the boat attacks. Against that backdrop, a broad range of experts in the laws governing the use of lethal force have called the administration's armed conflict theory nonsensical. Mr. Trump and Mr. Hegseth, they argue, have been giving illegal orders to the troops under their command to commit crimes. With the notable exception of Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, most lawmakers who have been arguing that the boat attacks are murders have been Democrats who do not control Congress. Until recently, however, most of Mr. Trump's fellow Republicans have shied away from exercising oversight. A November 28th Washington Post article that renewed attention to the September 2nd attack focused on the follow-up strike has made some Republicans in Congress willing to ask harder questions. The video, described by people who saw it, shows a strike destroy the boat and kill 9 people. When the smoke cleared, 2 survivors clung to the overturned hull. They tried to flip it, climb on, and waved, possibly at a military aircraft. A follow-up strike left only water. People debating whether the second strike was a war crime have strained to fit such details into armed conflict concepts. To be protected as shipwrecked, naval combatants can't take hostile actions. Could the attempt to flip the hull be interpreted as combat activity on the theory that they might have been trying to reach cocaine, which the administration has portrayed as a weapon? Soldiers on a battlefield can't be killed if they surrender. Could their wave be seen as an offer to do so? Such parsing of the details of the second strike could end up being a favor to the Trump administration. The idea that something was bad about that particular strike implicitly suggests the first one on that boat and all other attacks on other boats was fine. And the exercise reinforces the premise that the situation should be thought about through the lens of an armed conflict. The larger question now is whether the belated bipartisan interest in that particular strike will generate momentum for a broader look at the entire killing spree that Mr. Trump and Mr. Hegseth have led the U.S. military to perform, said Rebecca Ingbar, a professor at the Cardozo School of Law and a former State Department expert in the law of war. There is a risk that the focus on the second strike, and specifically the talk of war crimes, feeds into the administration's false wartime framing and veils the fact that the entire boat strikes campaign is murder, full stop, she said. She added, the administration's evolving justification for the second strike only lays bare the absurdity of their legal claims for their campaign as a whole, that transporting drugs is somehow the equivalent of wartime hostilities. China issues warning to foreign journalists by the New York Times. Beijing's national security arm in Hong Kong summoned representatives and journalists from some foreign media organizations, including the New York Times, on Saturday to warn them about coverage of the city's deadliest fire in decades, as well as of upcoming legislative decisions. The move underscores the heightened scrutiny facing international news organizations in Hong Kong after Beijing imposed a national security law on the city with sweeping powers to curtail dissent. The officials said that foreign journalists would face consequences if they were deemed to have violated the law. Do not say you have not been warned. During the briefing, officials from the Office for Safeguarding National Security in Hong Kong read a statement that criticized recent reporting by the foreign media on a massive fire last month at Wang Fu Court, a high-rise complex in northern Hong Kong that had killed at least 159 people. The officials said that some reports had distorted facts, spread false information, and smeared the government's rescue and relief work. The statement also said that some reporting had attacked and interfered with the election to be held on Sunday. The officials did not give specifics or single out any particular outlets or reports. Press freedom and obeying the law are not mutually contradictory, the officials warned. No media organization may use the banner of press freedom to interfere in China's internal affairs or interfere in Hong Kong's affairs. The officials did not identify themselves nor take questions. The meeting was a rare direct engagement between China's National Security Office in Hong Kong and the foreign media. It highlighted the increasingly assertive role the office plays in regulating public discourse in the city, said Thomas E. Kellogg, the executive director of the Georgetown Center for Asian Law, who called it a direct threat to press freedom in Hong Kong. Since the national security law went into effect, local media outlets have been under attack, he said. This move shows that Beijing wants to increase the pressure on international media outlets as well. The office has put out statements warning anti-China forces not to exploit the Wang Fu court fire. It also said that hostile foreign forces were seeking to cause trouble for the government, and such forces would be punished no matter how far away they may be. Analysts have said that the sharply worded statements suggested that the authorities are concerned that the disaster could fuel a fresh political reckoning in a city that was engulfed with anti-government protests in 2019. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In the Brazil Dispatch, a sleepy town of droughts and dreams, it's showtime. There's a color quarter-page photograph that has this very large sign. The words are in Portuguese, and the caption says, "A towering sign in Cabeceiras, Brazil, spells the phonetic pronunciation of Hollywood in Brazilian Portuguese." This sign looks just like that big sign in the Hollywood Hills, only it's in Portuguese. In a dusty hamlet moonlighting as Hollywood, climate threats are never far. By Anna Ionova. Brazil. The actors were stepping in front of the camera were amateurs, but they were hardly new to show business. There was a bearded rancher who had played a bounty hunter in a Western-style action flick, a soft-spoken cook who had moonlighted as a dancer in an art house drama, and a chatty grandmother who made her silver screen debut in a beloved comedy more than 2 decades ago. We can do it all. You tell us to laugh, we laugh. You tell us to cry, we cry. The grandmother, Maria Edith Santos Franca, 71, said on a recent weekday morning as she prepared to audition for the latest film production coming to town. The town was not Hollywood, but Cabeceiras, a sleepy hamlet of more than 5,000 people tucked deep within Brazil's dusty outback. Some 6,000 miles from the buzzing studios of Los Angeles, it has become known as Brazil's own Hollywood, serving as a backdrop for at least 50 films and television shows since 1929. Like the American town that inspires it, part of Cabeceiras' appeal is the dramatic landscapes that flank it and the year-round crisp blue skies. Known as Brazil's driest community, its biggest curse has proved to be a director's dream. The scarce rains that have made life a struggle have also turned it into a perfect shooting location. Cabeceiras relishes its show business credentials. An oversized clapboard and a 50-foot gate fashioned out of cartoonish film strips marks the town's entrance. Yellow stars are painted on the sidewalk, meant to evoke the gold ones on Hollywood's Walk of Fame. And, nestled in the parched hills, a towering sign spells out Rollywood, the phonetic pronunciation of Hollywood in Brazilian Portuguese. There is the butcher, the gas station, and the inn, home to the town's single makeshift movie theater. At least 2 pizzerias sell pies with names inspired by famous Brazilian films shot in town. On a scorching Monday morning, a few dozen people packed the lobby of a modest government office for a casting call. They hoped to land a part in a short film with a theme familiar to many here. A woman sets out on a quest to deliver a letter in the distant village her mother left decades ago, fleeing poverty and drought. Inside the darkened room, serving as a studio, they were asked to improvise lines. Some grew shy or fell into nervous giggles. There were a few false starts, with eager actors launching into the scene before the cameras rolled. Cut! Nivaldo Rodrigues, the director, called after another take. A smiling woman ended her screen test by waving goodbye to the camera. Most, though, were clearly seasoned experts. When Mr. Rodrigues asked Emiliton de Farinas Cunha if he knew the recipient of the fictitious letter, the 37-year-old rancher improvised without skipping a beat. "You don't know she's my aunt?" When Ms. Franca's turn came, she peered confidently into the camera and insisted the recipient had actually dropped dead. "Is it hard to pretend?" she said. "Not at all. It's the easiest thing in the world." "It's not just about the money," said Eileen Soares, 30, a cook auditioning during a break from work. "It's about art. It's about our identity." Mr. Rodrigues said his crew was planning to run workshops for the town's aspiring actors. The goal, he added, was to turn Cabeceiras into more than a backdrop. "We want to harness this talent," he said. Historians believe the first film to be shot here was a documentary in 1929 about daily life in the Northeast, a frequent source of inspiration for Brazilian artists. But it was a 2000 comedic tale of a pair of broke tricksters who con a fictional village that made Cabeceiras into a film hub. More recently, the town has served as a photogenic backdrop for a string of splashy television shows about Brazil's folkloric bandits, produced with streaming platforms like Disney Plus and Amazon Prime. Film and TV productions have been an economic boon. Crews pay hundreds of dollars to hire local actors and rent homes, ranches, and livestock. A silent role can pay around $30 per day. Renting a horse or goat can rake in almost $40, and uttering a line pays nearly $300, more than the monthly minimum salary in Brazil. But this Hollywood, like the American one, also faces headwinds. The influx of film crews has set off a mad scramble for water, long a scarce resource here. Climate change is also making rains and film schedules less predictable. At the same time, the advance of technologies like artificial intelligence have made simulating exotic landscapes possible without costly travel. Lately, some residents say fewer productions have been coming to town. The recent sequel to the comedy that catapulted Cabeceiras to fame was shot in a Rio de Janeiro studio. That's a sore subject here. It turned out horrible, said Jefferson Soares, 30, a school administrator and aspiring actor. Not believable at all. Despite the snub, the town clings to its Hollywood identity, which itself has become a way of earning a living. On the rural outskirts of town, Mr. Cunha, the rancher, waited for the next group of visitors. Unbothered by the stifling heat, he wore a herder's cap and gaiters made from goatskin, the type his father and grandfather had worn to shield against the piercing shrubs of the savannah. Now, Mr. Cunha wears this uniform for movie roles and Brazilians from out of town. It was a gift from a set, he said, pointing to a cell phone video of him playing a bandit. He was already in character when a tour bus sputtered to a stop in front of his family's ranch, which he has turned into lodging. "Welcome to the world-famous Hollywood of the Northeast," he yelled. Inside, Mr. Cunha sold water and homemade liquor to the tourists. A few mugs, stamped with his face, were perched on a shelf behind the bar. "We want to give people a souvenir to take home," he said. Soon he was leading the group through a maze of towering boulders as he told behind-the-scenes anecdotes from the movie sets. He stopped at a spot where a pivotal scene from a hit television show was shot. "This is where she sees the blood mark and realizes something is wrong," he said with dramatic pause. Now we make more money from the rocks than we ever did from the goats," Mr. Cunha explained. He plans to expand his lodge with more rooms and a pool. To ensure enough water for his vision, he has dug a well reaching 330 feet into the parched soil. "God willing, it won't ever dry up," he said. Lately, newcomers who share this optimism have flocked to Cabeceiras. On the fringes of town, a working-class neighborhood has added rows of new cookie-cutter homes. But the town's dizzying growth has had drawbacks. "We always short on water," said Marco Vincius da Cruz Persia, 48, a supermarket clerk, leaning on the neighborhood's empty water tank. As the sun began to fade, the film crew set up on a square just behind the town's colonial-era church. Mr. Soares and Mr. Cunha, who had made the cut that morning, took up their positions. "Action!" yelled Mr. Rodriguez, the director. The aspiring actors strolled into the shot, coming to the aid of the actress clutching a letter. They scratched their heads, feigned wonder, called for help, and finally pointed the lost newcomer to a cobblestone street lined with candied-colored houses. After a half-dozen takes, it was a wrap. Mr. Cunha, beaming, huddled with the crew for a group photo. "Who knows," he said. "Maybe the other Hollywood will hear about us and come knocking." The story behind the story. The Times celebrates a century in Shanghai by Keith Bradsher. Keith Bradsher is a Beijing bureau chief for the Times. He previously served as bureau chief in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Detroit. The year 1925 was a turning point for China. The economy was booming, with factories opening along the Yangtze River. Chinese artists like Liu Jiapao played a key role in the 1925 Paris Exposition in starting the Art Deco movement, with Shanghai later rivaling New York City and Miami Beach in exemplifying the new fashion. But in politics, the year brought tragedy. Sun Yat-sen, the man widely credited with overthrowing several millenniums of imperial rule in 1911, died on March 12, 1925. 11 weeks later, Shanghai was rocked by a huge labor demonstration that was suppressed with deadly force by the city's British-led police, sparking protests around the world. Those two events prompted the New York Times to establish in Shanghai the newspaper's first bureau in China. The Times has covered China up close ever since, and marked the Bureau's centennial this autumn. During World War I, the Times greatly expanded its network of bureaus in Europe, but was slower to do so in Asia. Starting in the latter half of the 19th century, the newspaper's Asia coverage relied mostly on dispatches from traders, missionaries, sailors, soldiers, and other travelers. In the early 1900s, the Times began publishing articles from news agencies like the Associated Press, which supplied the initial report published by the Times of Mr. Sun's death. By coincidence, Nicholas Roosevelt, a prominent commentator and correspondent on foreign affairs for the Times in the mid-1920s, was on a trip to China and other East Asian nations when Mr. Sun died. Mr. Roosevelt was uniquely positioned to assess the importance of that death. He was the son of President Theodore Roosevelt's first cousin and was trained by the president since boyhood for a diplomatic career. He assisted President Woodrow Wilson at the Versailles Conference following World War I and spent most of the next several decades alternating between roles at the Times and as a senior diplomat. During World War II, a more distant cousin, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, named him as America's Deputy Director of War Information. In the 1920s, Mr. Sun was widely perceived in the United States as the person who could hold China's fractious provinces together. His death provoked overwrought predictions that China would dissolve into a civil war that might draw in foreign powers. Nicholas Roosevelt sent a cable to Adolph Oakes, the publisher of the Times, and urged the newspaper to establish a bureau in China. The Times was still mulling the recommendation when violence erupted in Shanghai at the end of May. The Times quickly hired Thomas F. Millard, a well-known American journalist working in Shanghai, as the newspaper's first correspondent in China. Mr. Millard left the Times in early 1927. Another correspondent, Frederick Moore, was sent to Peking, now called Beijing. But after a few months, he and his wife sailed home, declaring the schools inadequate for their children. Before he left, he hired Halit Abend, who covered China for the Times until 1941. For his first 2 years, Mr. Abend was based in Peking, where he rented a 12,000 square foot house for $12 a month, or $223 in today's dollars, after allowing for inflation. Such bargains are no longer available. He moved to Shanghai in 1929 after nationalist leaders tried to deport him for writing articles accurately warning that they had not brought regional warlords under control. He then lived in Shanghai as chief China correspondent for 12 years. In articles about Japan's rapid military advances in China from 1931 onward, Mr. Abend warned that the war in the Pacific was increasingly likely between Japan and the United States. During the 1930s, he assembled in Shanghai a team of journalists to cover China for the Times. One of them, Tilman Durden, was among the first eyewitnesses to the 1937 "to tell the world of mass killings by Japanese forces of civilians in Nanjing." He then covered World War II from Chongqing, China's wartime capital. Based after the war in Shanghai in Nanjing, China's post-war capital, Mr. Durden and a team covered the civil war between communists and nationalists. The Shanghai Bureau even had a well-equipped darkroom for developing photos. After Mao Zedong came to power in 1949, the Times covered China mainly from Hong Kong. As China reopened to trade and investment in 1979, the Times reopened its bureau in Beijing that June, and then reopened in Shanghai in January 1995. Both bureaus continued operating through the COVID-19 pandemic, although with a staff much depleted by U.S.-China tensions, and both remain open today. The Times marked the centennial of its Shanghai bureau this autumn on the city's famous Bund, with a reception in the Roosevelt Room, which has portraits at either end of Nicholas Roosevelt's two presidential cousins. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here to help: How to Live to 100 according to Dick Van Dyke. When I learned that Dick Van Dyke, the singing, dancing star of classic films like Mary Poppins, would soon be turning 100, I knew I had to get him on the phone. While relaxing in his Los Angeles bedroom, he shared some of his secrets for aging well. This is by Jancy Dunn. He stays active. It's well documented that regular exercise increases your chances of a long life. And Mr. Van Dyke, who will celebrate his 100th birthday on Saturday, tries to move every single day. He goes to the gym 3 days a week to do circuit training, he said, and sometimes as he moves from one machine to the next, he busts out a soft shoe dance. In between gym days, he does yoga and stretching. He commits to being playful. Playfulness, he told me, gives you a sense of fun and freedom, no matter how you feel physically. And research suggests it lowers stress and improves well-being. Mr. Van Dyke looks for moments to be playful, whether it's chances to crack jokes or make a toddler laugh in the supermarket line. He says yes. Being open to new experiences as an older adult may be good for your brain health and emotional well-being. For Mr. Van Dyke, that means saying yes to things as often as he can. When a local theater asked him to direct grade school children, he immediately accepted. Last year, he agreed to dance, nimbly and barefoot, in a Coldplay video called All My Love. It can be tempting to dwell in the past, he explained, but saying yes keeps him firmly planted in the present and the future. He maintains his connections. Keeping your social ties strong is a key to aging well, and Mr. Van Dyke makes an effort to sustain his relationships. He told me that he's constantly scheming to get his grandchildren and great-grandchildren over to his house, and that he wants his backyard to feel like a theme park. His next projects, a rope swing and a zip line. Just hearing them all out there squealing gives me such joy, he wrote in his new book, 100 Rules for Living to 100, An Optimist's Guide to a Happy Life. For 25 years, Mr. Van Dyke has sung in an a cappella group called the Vantastics. The other guys are all decades younger, which has a rejuvenating effect, he said. Saudi Arabia Sells You Booze, If You're Allowed in the Store, by Vivian Nerim. Saudi Arabia has banned alcohol for more than 70 years. So when whispers spread that an unmarked store in Riyadh, the capital, was quietly selling whiskey and champagne to wealthy foreign residents, it did not take long for a queue of cars to form outside. In recent weeks, the liquor store, previously open only to diplomats who are exempt from the prohibition, has been selling to non-Muslim foreigners who hold an expensive premium residency permit, according to 5 customers interviewed by the New York Times. Premium residency is a limited status, generally conferred on wealthy or highly educated foreigners who work for government-owned entities, or in strategic sectors like healthcare. The customers, a mix of premium residents and diplomats, spoke on the condition of anonymity because of local sensitivities around the topic, and in some cases because they feared disrupting their newfound access to alcohol. No public announcement has been made about a change in the conservative Islamic kingdom's alcohol policy. But on a sunny morning this past week, I camped outside the Riyadh store and saw that business was brisk. The beige complex containing the store resembled dozens of others in the city's diplomatic quarter, a secluded neighborhood filled with embassies. The store was blank except for an enigmatic sign that read, VAT-exempt goods for diplomats only, referring to the value-added tax, which is similar to a sales tax. A succession of high-end SUVs approached a metal gate, where a security guard peered at drivers' IDs, deciding if they could pass. Shoppers who emerged from the store described a frenzied scene of eager new buyers crowding the aisles, purchasing thousands of dollars worth of booze. The loosening of entry procedures coincided with a new dual pricing system. Diplomats were charged one set of marked up prices, and premium residents paid an even higher set, several of the customers said. I saw a receipt that showed a middling bottle of wine cost roughly $85, more than 5 times its price in the United States. Though it is unclear who owns the store, several details about how it operates suggest the government is involved. Customers said they were allowed to buy a monthly quota that was linked to their government-issued ID number and a smartphone app that diplomats used to gain access to the store was created by the Tax and Customs Authority. The Center for International Communication, a Saudi government media office, did not respond to a request for comment. The system's vagueness and the official silence around it, not to mention the black bags that customers haul back to their cars, are in keeping with the rapid but sometimes nebulous ways in which Saudi Arabia has transformed under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In the span of a decade, Prince Mohammed has remade the kingdom from top to bottom. Once infamous for its religious police, strict dress code, and ban on women driving, Saudi Arabia now hosts mixed-gender raves, and Saudi women are free to drive, work, and travel abroad as they please. The path to greater social openness has been bewildering. Officials are often publicly ambiguous on policy changes that could prompt a backlash, leaving it unclear whether there was, in fact, a change. This is similar to how Saudi authorities approached a lot of social policies, said Andrew Lieber, an assistant professor at Tulane University in New Orleans and an expert in Saudi politics. Allow relatively incremental changes under the surface without making a big announcement, giving them plausible deniability in case they want to pause or roll back the policy at some point. For instance, as recently as 2018, all commercial establishments across the kingdom closed several times a day to mark prayer times. They no longer do, but there was no formal announcement of this shift. Instead, business practices changed haltingly over several years, causing a great deal of confusion. Just a few weeks ago, a senior advisor to the Crown Prince even told the Times that he was not aware of any plans to legalize alcohol. Nothing has changed so far, the advisor Ahmed Al-Khatib, who is the Minister of Tourism and head of the kingdom's Quality of Life program, said in an interview last month. We'll see how things go in the future. Even finding the store is difficult. It does not appear on online maps, so friends discreetly share its GPS location. New customers were also uncertain about the conditions to enter the store and whether they could legally serve the alcohol to friends or resell it. The Saudi government officially outlawed alcohol in the 1950s. At the time, a report in Time magazine said the prohibition came after a son of Saudi Arabia's founding king killed a British diplomat during an alcohol-fueled dispute. The ban has its roots in religion, as the Quran advises Muslims to avoid alcohol. As in the United States during Prohibition, the strict embargo belies a brisk black market. For decades, homemade spirits and high-end imported bottles have been poured at private parties in gated residential compounds and in well-stocked Saudi homes. Branded alcohol often entered the informal market through embassies, which were able to import an unlimited supply of alcohol in diplomatic shipments, until the government ended that system in January of 2024. The new Reda store opened as an official alternative, but allowed only non-Muslim diplomats to enter and limited them to a monthly quota of alcohol. In local media, Saudi officials frame this as a crackdown on illicit trade. Even so, some embassies tried to carve out exceptions, seeking higher buying quotas in the store. Others, citing an informational security risk, resisted the requirement that diplomats download a Saudi government smartphone app to enter, according to 3 diplomats who spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the matter. At the time, some residents whispered that the new store was a pretext to broaden access to alcohol. Once the new system was in place, expanding the customer base would be relatively easy. For the Saudi authorities, there are many motivations to allow alcohol sales. The kingdom's ostensibly sober social life has inhibited Prince Mohammed's drive to attract more highly educated foreigners to work there. Saudi Arabia is hosting the Men's Soccer World Cup in 2034, and many foreign attendees would expect to be able to buy alcohol. Officials are also under pressure to expand tourism and increase the government's non-oil revenue, both key parts of Prince Mohammed's economic diversification plan. The government can't have missed that alcohol sales and associated taxes are a huge moneymaker for neighboring Dubai, said Mr. Lieber, the expert in Saudi politics. In Dubai, the largest city in the United Arab Emirates, alcohol is widely available, including for Muslims. Despite its vast oil wealth, Saudi Arabia is currently experiencing a budget crunch, and it is expected to face fiscal deficits in the coming years. While officials appear to be moving cautiously to avoiding pushback from Saudis who oppose the legalization of alcohol, a years-long political crackdown has left few dissenters willing to speak out. The recent expansion of alcohol sales has received no coverage in local media, and no comment from the Grand Mufti, the kingdom's official religious leader, whom Prince Mohammed recently appointed. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Germany's defense minister faces a new threat and the weight of history, by Christopher F. Schutze. Berlin. Ever since Germany reformed its military after World War II, the primary role of the German defense minister has been to maintain an army large enough to protect the country, but constrained enough to prevent a return to German militarism. The role of the incumbent, Boris Pistorius, is different. As Russia warns that it is ready for war with Europe, Mr. Pistorius's goal is to make Germany's military capable of leading the continent's defense in a major land conflict, and to prepare the country's pacifist population for this new posture. On Friday, German lawmakers approved the latest part of Mr. Pistorius's plan, a law that aims to increase the number of German soldiers to 260,000 by 2035, a nearly 50% boost. To incentivize recruitment, soldiers will be paid more and receive more training that is useful for civilian careers. All 18-year-old men will be sent a questionnaire requiring them to provide information about their health and fitness, making it easier to identify potential recruits. Women will be able to fill the form out voluntarily. The law, which had set off one of the most turbulent national debates in recent memory, stops short of actually drafting soldiers. That is a mistake, according to some experts who fear Germany won't be ready for a Russian attack on NATO territory, even if the law requires Parliament to discuss reintroducing conscription if too few people volunteer for duty. Mr. Pistorius's supporters said it was the best he could do, given a deep-seated unease about rearming the country that started World War II. This is one of the biggest social changes we have seen in many years in the areas of security and defense, Mr. Pistorius, 65, said in an interview. It affects a generation and future generations who have never had to deal with these issues because the threat did not exist, he added. The law is the latest in a sequence of moves that were unthinkable less than a decade ago, but that Mr. Pistorius has promoted in order to bolster German defense. In March, he helped lead a successful effort to remove limits on military spending from Germany's constitution. That was a major shift for a debt-shy country, and it enabled Mr. Pistorius to spend billions more on arms, tanks, ships, and aircraft that the country previously couldn't buy. Mr. Pistorius has also championed a stuttering effort to integrate Europe's militaries. He was a guiding force behind the recent formation of the Group of Five, a bloc of defense ministers from major European countries who seek tighter security coordination. For some, such moves provoke unease, summoning memories of German expansionism during the two world wars. In our interview, Mr. Pistorius acknowledged that the weight of German history, but it had given him others a sense of responsibility. Namely, that we must do our part to ensure that we continue to live in peace in Europe, he said, adding that the expanded German army will still be much smaller than it was during the Cold War. Back then, Germany had as many as 500,000 soldiers, but limited military ambitions, and it never sought to leave Europe's defense in the way that he now seeks. Mr. Pistorius's efforts come as other European countries also try to rapidly increase their standing armies to counter an expansionist Russia, and as the United States scales back its support for the continent. The task of rebuilding Germany's army is even more fraught because of the long shadow cast by the militarism in the Nazi era. Opinion polls in Germany show a pervasive fear of sending another generation into war. Domestic politics play a role too, with parties on the far right and left that are partial to Russia or that favor dialogue with it. Despite pushing for contentious measures, Mr. Pistorius has remained Germany's most popular politician for most of the past 3 years, according to monthly opinion polls. He speaks with the rasp of a drill sergeant who has been yelling all day. His speech is unadorned, to the point, and sometimes self-deprecating. At one point in our interview, he compared his work to that of a soccer coach. I witnessed his brusque charisma on a visit in January to eastern Poland, where a group of German soldiers were helping to staff a missile air defense system near the border with Ukraine. Mr. Pistorius, there to boost morale, huddled among the soldiers and praised them before singling out a young captain to wish her a happy birthday and shaking her hand. He then commended a sergeant's military record and promoted him on the spot by slapping new insignia on his arm. It was a simple but recurring trick employed by Mr. Pistorius, who often surprises soldiers with promotions or effusive praise during visits. That is a major change in tone compared to the previous eras when soldiers felt ignored or scorned by the political leadership. I noticed how he behaves, how he speaks, concise, factual, and precise, and not just empty talk. Hinderlinde Kiebel, a veteran photojournalist who followed Mr. Pistorius for a year, told German television in April. Mr. Pistorius's popularity has allowed him to survive the electoral fall of his center-left Social Democratic Party, which led the previous governing coalition until it collapsed last year. Reappointed as part of a new coalition after the center-right won the last election, Mr. Pistorius is Germany's first defense minister since World War II to serve chancellors from 2 different parties. His rise to prominence follows a career spent in the obscurity of regional politics. Born in 1960, he grew up in Osnabrück, a mid-sized industrial city in West Germany. After briefly serving as an army conscript in the early 1980s, he worked as a lawyer and civil servant before entering local politics with the Social Democrats in the 1990s. He became mayor of Osnabrück in 2006 and then interior minister of his home state. In 2023, Mr. Pistorius was thrust onto the national stage when he was unexpectedly appointed as defense minister. He had no experience at the federal level, but had gained a reputation as a hard-working, capable bureaucrat. Working in local politics taught him to talk to the people for whom I make my policies, he said. I tend not to make policy based on the principle that I know what is best for people, but rather I listen. Still, early in his tenure as defense minister, Mr. Pistorius provoked a national furor by insisting that Germany become kriegstugig, or war-ready, a provocative term for a country that since 1945 had sought only to be defense-ready. The outcry highlighted Mr. Pistorius's delicate position. He wants to prepare Germany for an escalation with Russia, but critics say that his policies are making that escalation more likely. The federal government is frightening an entire generation, Sarah Wagenknecht, a far-left politician who has long pushed for a negotiation with Russia, said in a text message. The federal government is playing Russian roulette with the prospects and soon possibly with the lives of young people, she added. German hawks say that Mr. Pistorius hasn't gone far enough to counter Russian threats, and that the law approved on Friday is ineffective because it doesn't introduce a compulsory draft. further evidence of the half-heartedness of German security policy over the last 3.5 years, Sönke Neitzel, a military historian, said during a parliamentary hearing before the vote, calling the bill yet another example of hesitation and procrastination. But Mr. Pistorius remains phlegmatic. Debate is healthy, he said, not least because it is slowly acclimatizing society to the need for action. The discussion alone, he said, is changing the way many people think about the times we live in and about the threats we face. Last week's top trending headlines. Tennessee 7th District special election results. Matt Van Epps, a veteran and Trump-endorsed Republican, fended off Afton Bain, a Democratic state representative from Nashville, in the last congressional special election of the year. Though the outcome was a boon in the short term for Republicans, the relatively tight margin in a deep red district sent the party a warning before the 2026 midterms. College student is deported during a trip home for Thanksgiving. Amy Lucia Lopez Beloza, 19, who was brought by her parents from Honduras in the United States when she was 7, was detained at Boston Logan International Airport and deported to Honduras. Her father said that neither she nor her parents knew there was an order for her deportation. A spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security said that an immigration judge had ordered her to be deported in 2015. The 10 best books of 2025. The editors of the book review read hundreds of books and discussed their merits and flaws before choosing their list of the year's standout fiction and nonfiction. Their picks included a World War I novel and a mother-daughter memoir. The list received more than 400 comments from readers. The appeals court says Alina Habba is an unlawful U.S. attorney. A federal appeals court ruled that Alina Habba, President Trump's former lawyer, had been serving unlawfully as a U.S. attorney in New Jersey. Ms. Habba is one of a number of U.S. attorneys whom the Trump administration has sought to keep in power, even though she was neither confirmed by the Senate nor appointed by a district trial court. The case involving her will likely reach the Supreme Court. A headline from history. Wheat strike shuts North Dakota banks. December 7th, 1920. A conference of bankers was planned in Bismarck, North Dakota, to consider the acute financial situation brought on by farmers' wheat strike, which resulted in the closing of one national bank and 22 state banks. The Times reported during World War I, with European countries unable to grow enough crops, U.S. farmers had become accustomed to a healthy crop demand and subsequently borrowed money for more land and equipment. As Europe recovered, that demand fell. The week before the conference, with the price of wheat reportedly below production costs, 10,000 North Dakota farmers pledged not to sell their grain until the price hit $2.50. Over the next decade, the price of wheat would grow more dire for farmers. By 1933, the wheat that had sold for $2.45 a bushel in 1920 would bring only 38 cents. Relief would come when President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Agricultural Adjustment Act, which regulated agricultural production. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, December 7th issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Jackie. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,